Good morning. Thank you for coming today. And I know you may have some questions, like who was this Brecht guy? What is a petite bourgeoisie? And why are we talking about the 7 deadly sins? We are Unitarians. Let me explain. In the year 1933, the global economy was in a profound crisis. Armies of unemployed were lining up at soup kitchens. The specter of starvation was haunting the poorest people in the wealthiest countries. Extreme divisions between the few haves and the multitude of have-nots were threatening the social orders established on the system of capitalism. In Germany, the ruling class of bankers, industrialists, and wealthy landowners decided to back a relatively obscure politician named Adolf Hitler. He promised to restore order in the land and get the workers back to work. He put his army of fascist brown shirts to work immediately, rounding up 150,000 German communists into concentration camps, ultimately murdering over 25,000 of them. Then the Nazis pitted worker against worker along racial and ethnic divisions. The German playwright Bertolt Brecht, perhaps the most influential dramatist of the 20th century, then 35 years old, was already famous worldwide for his theater work and poetry. He had collaborated with his friend, famed German composer Kurt Weill, a few years earlier on writing and staging the Three-Penny Opera, an opera for beggars, which ends with the question, what's picking a lock compared to buying shares? What's breaking into a bank compared to founding one? What's murdering a man compared to employing one? Brecht's revolutionary theory of theater stemmed from his commitment to social change. Brecht was a communist. Weill was Jewish. They got out of Germany, foreseeing the murders to come, and went to Paris. Weill would never return to Germany again, while Brecht, evading the Nazi armies through France, Denmark, Sweden, Russia, and the United States, finally returned to Berlin from exile 20 years later. But let's go back to Paris for a moment. There, in exile, Brecht and Weill staged The 7 Deadly Sins of the Petite Bourgeoisie, a sung ballet. The 7 Deadly Sins tells the story of 2 sisters, Anna I and Anna II. The libretto is satirical. The important moral point is that Anna II does actual wrong only when she does not commit the sin concerned. Think about this for a moment. Anna II frequently tries to do the actual right thing, but is cured of this temptation to sin by her hypocritical family and her prudent alter ego. For instance, her pride consists in not wanting to work in a strip club. Her lust is wanting to marry the one she loves rather than marrying for money. And her anger is righteous anger against ill treatment of a fellow worker. In the segment on gluttony, Anna is warned against overeating. She signed a movie star contract that has a weight clause. Brecht questioned conventional morality and saw it, even in its best intentioned form, as a means of sanctimoniously enshrining the rules and ideas that the dominant economic system produces to maintain its own existence, and noticed that such morality was usually applied quite selectively. In China, there's a saying, the emperor can burn 1,000 villages, but the people cannot light a single candle. Let's imagine an economic system where a small but dominant class of people own virtually all the means of production. Factories, machinery, airports, software, banks, buildings, and so on, and rely on the underpaid labor of another class to actually produce things. The owning class get to keep the stuff that is made and sell it at a massive profit. Let's call that dominant class by a French name, the bourgeoisie, and the class of people selling their labor, people degraded to commodity, the proletariat. In the unenviable middle might be a class we will call the little bourgeoisie, or the petite bourgeoisie. It does not outright own any significant means of production, but as it may be employed as tenured academics, shopkeepers, artisans, and middle managers or self-employed professionals, it might enjoy some moderate control over the means of production. The petite bourgeoisie likes to promote a morality that lauds the staunch individualism of great men and women and condemns the base selfishness of the masses. It glorifies ambition, but frowns upon the dumb greed of the poor. Insists on equal rights for all, but does not even consider freedom from exploitation to be a right at all. Paradoxically, they seek personal wealth and equality at the same time. The proletariat, by contrast, understands all too well that sometimes morality is a luxury that common people cannot afford. Erst kommt das Fressen, dann kommt die Moral. First the grub, then the morals, as Brecht put it in the Threepenny Opera. With that said, join us today in looking critically at our own 7 deadly sins, the 7 principles of Unitarianism.
Good morning. Good morning. It may become something of a surprise that this is not the first time that capitalism has been talked about in this pulpit. Back in 1910, William Thurston Brown, a Unitarian minister whose portrait hangs in the hallway just behind Eliot Hall, stood in this very place, in this very church, excoriating capitalism. He preached to his congregation that they should reject the dominance of property over people. He told the congregation of his day that they were living in a socially and morally bankrupt capitalistic order that was smothering democracy and giving the lie to every noble idea of justice and love. McCormick and Sillitoe wrote in A History of Utah Radicalism that one of Brown's most important insights was that capitalism was all-encompassing. Capitalism permeated everything, he said. It rules the whole fabric of society. He urged Unitarians to side with the workers in class struggle, and not just from the pulpit, but also in the streets. At this time, the industrial workers of the world had organized railroad workers and were singing Joe Hill's comic songs. Unitarian minister William Thurston Brown was making a speech on Main Street about freedom of speech. Hundreds of people had gathered to see him. Before he could get very far into his speech, police officers came to break up the meeting and arrest Brown. With a jerk that lifted the speaker from the soapbox on which he stood, the patrolman pulled him into his arms and took him to police headquarters. According to police, Brown resisted when they tried to search him, and his ear was cut when they wrestled him to the ground. The minister had only gotten what was coming to him, the police officer said. Not to be deterred, William Thurston Brown continued to devote his life to social and economic justice. Now we would like to invite the children to head on to their religious education classes.
Now's your favorite part of the service. We're going to sing a verse, and then you're going to sing the chorus printed in your order of service. When I was just a little thing, I used to love parades with banners, bands, red balloons, and maybe lemonade. When I came home one May day, my neighbor's father said, "Them marchers is all commies, tell me, kid, are you a red?" Well, I didn't know just what he meant. My hair back then was all brown. Our house was plain red brick like most others in the town. So I went and asked my mama why our neighbor called me red. My mommy took me on her knee and this is what she said. "Well, you ain't done nothing, you ain't been called a red. If you marched or agitated, then you're bound to hear it said. So you might as well ignore it or love the word instead. 'Cause you ain't been doing nothing if you ain't been called a red."
When I was growing up, I had my troubles, I suppose, when someone took exception to my face or to my clothes, or tried to cheat me on the job, or hit me on the head. When I organized to fight back, why the stinkers called me red.
And you ain't done nothing if you ain't been called a red. If you organized your workplace, then you're bound to hear it said. So you might as well ignore it or love the word instead. 'Cause you ain't been doing nothing if you ain't been called a red.
When I was living on my own, one apartment that I had a lousy, rotten landlord. Let me tell you, he was bad. But when he tried to throw me out, I rubbed my hands and said, "You haven't seen a struggle if you haven't fought a red."
And you ain't done nothing if you ain't been called a red. You've organized your neighbors and you're bound to hear it said. So you might as well ignore it or love the word instead. 'Cause you ain't been doing nothing if you ain't been called a red. Well, I keep on agitating, 'cause what else can you do? Are you going to let those sons of bitches walk all over you? My friend said, "You'll get fired hanging with that commie mob." I should be so lucky, buddy, for I ain't got a job. Oh, you ain't done nothing if you ain't been called a red. If you've criticized anything, you're bound to hear it said. So you might as well ignore it or love the word instead. 'Cause you ain't been doing nothing if you ain't been called a red.
Well, I've been agitating now for many years and more, for jobs and for equality, and always against war. I'll keep on agitating as far as I can see, and if that's what being red is good enough for me.
'Cause you ain't done nothing if you ain't been called a red. If you're marched or agitated, then you're bound to hear it said. So you might as well ignore it or love the word instead. 'Cause you ain't been doing nothing if you ain't been called. One more time. Yes, you ain't been doing nothing if you ain't been called a red.
Hello, good morning. My name's Danny Bates, and I'm going to talk about the first principle of the Unitarian Church, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Capitalism is a system that needs narratives to support it. For example, consider the rise of the liberal individual, a kind of atomistic personhood distinct from all other persons. This concept was unknown to the people of medieval and ancient worlds, but for us today, it's the only narrative that we know. In our modern liberal societies, we are taught that individuals create societies, but instead, as socialists, we can understand that it is in fact the reverse. Social relationships create individuals. Today's modern American capitalist culture, however, is humanity's pinnacle of individualized, isolated thinking. For example, our dreams consist of lonely McMansions on hilltops, fast cars, fame, fortune, dreams about separation, about rising above, escaping from other people and society. Our families, historically containing parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, all living under the same roof, have now been shrunk to the bare minimum size needed for reproduction. Our art is about the uniqueness of the poet's individual sensitivities and experiences. Even our social justice is isolating. Want to save the planet? You should recycle. Want to help the poor? You should give away your money. Everything everywhere is about what you are doing, what I am doing. Like Margaret Thatcher said, and we all believe now, there's no such thing as society. But oddly, as we survey the rugged individualist culture that America is famous for, it's hard to find truly unique people. We watch the same movies, we dress in the same Levi's, eat at the same Burger Kings and microbrew pubs, shop at the same organic food stores, laugh at the same dirty jokes, enjoy the same pop music. When we get mad, we use the same curse words. We name drop the same books, plays, TV shows, and podcasts, and talk about the same music festivals to impress each other with our knowledge of highbrow culture. We think of ourselves as separate and unique, but only because the delusion of our individuality obscures the fact that it is the same cultural and economic forces that create the conditions for our own individual development. Society isn't made up of individual unique snowflakes. Society, in fact, creates individuals through our common culture and language. But we don't have to settle for vague hippie-like descriptions to understand how we're all connected. Instead, we can understand that it is the concrete economic relationships that we all depend on for our food, our housing, our transportation, our jobs, our wages, in fact, even our very survival. The economy forms the fabric of the social system that can then create the inherent worth and dignity of every person.
Thank you, Danny. My name is Sven Haynes, and I'm going to read a poem by Brecht on this theme. It's called Questions from a Worker Who Reads. Who built Thebes of the 7 gates? In the books you will find the names of kings. Did the kings haul up the lumps of rocks? And Babylon, many times demolished, who raised it up so many times? In what houses of gold-glittering Lima did the builders live? Where, the evening that the wall of China was finished, did the masons go? Great Rome is full of triumphal arches. Who erected them? Over whom did the Caesars triumph? Had Byzantium, much praised in song, only palaces for its inhabitants? Even in fabled Atlantis, the night the ocean engulfed it, the drowning still bawled for their slaves. The young Alexander conquered India. Was he alone? Caesar beat the Gauls. Did he not even have a cook with him? Philip of Spain wept when his armada went down. Was he the only one to weep? Frederick II won the 7 Years' War. Who else won it? Every page of victory. Who cooked the feast for the victors? Every 10 years, a great man. Who paid the bill? So many reports, so many questions.
The second Unitarian principle is justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. If we believe that justice, equity, and compassion are important, how can we make our values in this area visible and real? When we look at our society, we can't fail to notice the inequality. If we want to talk about equality, which is implied in our second principle, we can think about how together as a society, we all produce great wealth. Everyone who works in the entire society produces wealth, but only a very few are allowed to say how this wealth will be used or who will benefit by it. Women have raised a demand for equal pay, but what is at least as important is equal say. If workers had equal say about our pay, we wouldn't have wealth inequality. We might have a say over the wealth we all produce, and with that say, we could put to use building social housing that doesn't enrich landlords and bankers. We could decide our collective wealth should produce a fair healthcare system, and education. We might even decide our way of producing things is wrong, or our products are harmful, or that we're destroying nature and upsetting the climate. With equal say, we could change all of that. Equality produces justice. But our second principle doesn't use the term equality. It uses the term equity. Equity tends to stand for a principle that people should receive distributions based on their efforts, talents, and contributions. If that's the guiding principle, then our economic system is still very far from meeting the equity principle. Thomas Piketty tells us that talent and education doesn't pay nearly as well as ownership. The upper 10% of the labor income distribution generally receives 25 to 30% of total labor income, whereas the top 10% of the capital income distribution always owns more than 50% of all wealth, and in some cases, 90% in some societies. Equity does have another meaning, and one that may be even more useful for our exploration of meaning and justice. Equity can be used to describe the principle that people should receive what they need, and not necessarily a completely equal share, when some people need more. That kind of equity may be even more important. To paraphrase Karl Marx, from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. If we had equality, we could decide that this kind of equity is a good way to distribute resources. But in all of this, we should recognize that equity will not be ours to distribute if we don't have an equal say in how the collective resources are distributed, used, or produced. A further hurdle is that our culture stigmatizes need and the needs. If needs are shameful, then we might not stand up and demand the right to meet our needs and the needs of others. A person who has learned to stop stigmatizing need is a compassionate person. Compassion is the last part of our second principle. While we may offer one another solace, our true compassion lies in strengthening one another so that we can work together for our collective liberation. This is how we achieve solidarity. This is how we can create equality and equal participation in our church and our community. Social justice looks at the way our society relates to different groups of us and treats some of us with full respect and deference, and others of us with contempt, criminalization, exclusion, and even with violence and death. We may rush to heal the wounds produced by social injustice, and we should do that. But we need to realize that social injustice arises as a symptom of a greater disease. That disease is economic injustice. If we want social justice, we must work to create economic justice. That's how we'll achieve the principle of justice, equality, equity, and compassion in human relations.
Arise, ye workers, from your slumbers. Arise, ye prisoners of want. For reason in revolt now thunders, and at last ends the age of Kant. Away with all your superstitions, sir, our masters, arise, arise. We'll change henceforth the old tradition, and spurn the dust to win the prize. So comrades, rally, and the last fight let us face. The International unites the human race.
The third principle is the acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. Some of the wealth we create doesn't come out in the form of money. Some of the wealth we create is love, happiness, contentment, joy, appreciation, and feelings of belonging. Terry Eagleton writes, "True wealth is the absolute working out of human creative potentialities, the development of all human powers as an end in itself. Labor, as we know it, is an alienated form of what Marx calls praxis, an ancient Greek word meaning the kind of free, self-realizing activity by which we transform the world. Human labor has rarely been of a fulfilling kind. For one thing, it has always been coerced in one way or another, even if the coercion in question is simply the need not to starve. For another thing, it has been carried on in class society, and thus not as an end in itself, but as a means to the power and profit of others. For Marx, as for his mentor, Aristotle, the good life consists of activities engaged in for their own sake. If we want to change the way we think and feel radically enough, we have to change what we do. Education or a change of heart are not enough. Our social being sets limits to our thought, and we could only break beyond these limits by changing that social being, which is to say, our material form of life. The spiritual is a question of feeding the hungry, welcoming immigrants, and protecting the poor from the violence of the rich. It's not the opposite of mundane, everyday existence. It is a particular way of living it. We have the opportunity to make connections here that class society usually prevents. What an exciting opportunity we have here for acceptance and personal change of ourselves, of our friends and members. A church can offer a kind of gap experience. We can use our experience here to prefigure a classless society. Here we have the opportunity to forge friendships, experience art, and try out new projects of our own design together. It's a radical opportunity to shed some of the constrictions of our workday lives and get to know others who live differently, think differently, and who also want to grow. Together we can use our experiences to make change in the world outside our doors. Let us honor the memory of the Uruguayan poet and historian Eduardo Galeano, who died this month. He gave us these words: "I don't believe in charity. I believe in solidarity. Charity is vertical, so it's humiliating. It goes from the top to the bottom. Solidarity is horizontal. It respects the other and learns from the other. I have a lot to learn from other people."
I'm Alexis Baig. This is Song of the Patch and the Overcoat. Whenever our overcoat is ragged, you come running up and say, "This can't continue. You must be helped in every possible manner." And full of zeal, you run off to the bosses while we who freeze are waiting. And you come back and in triumph show us what you have won for us: a little patch. Fine, that's a patch, all right. But where is the whole coat? Whenever we cry aloud from hunger, you come running up and say, "This can't continue. You must be helped in every possible manner." And full of zeal, you run to the bosses while we who starve are waiting. And you come back and in triumph show us what you've won for us: a crumb of bread. Fine. That's the breadcrumb, but where is the whole loaf? We need much more than patches. We need the whole overcoat, too. We need much more than the breadcrumb. We need the loaf itself. We need much more than a job. We need the whole factory and the coal and the ore and power in the state. Fine. That's what we all need. But what do you offer us?
Thank you, Alexis. The fourth principle states a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. What is truth and what is meaning? Brecht once said that the smallest division of humanity is two, not one. Karl Marx famously said that social being determines consciousness. What he meant was that the material world and its condition gives rise to ideas, not the other way around. This is called materialism, and in this context, it's the opposite of idealism. Before Marx, materialism examined the problem of knowledge apart from the social nature of man and apart from his historical development, and was therefore incapable of understanding the dependence of knowledge on social practice. That is, the dependence of knowledge on production and the class struggle. Above all, Marxists regard man's activity in production as the most fundamental practical activity, the determinant of all his other activities. Man's knowledge depends mainly on his activity in material production, through which he comes gradually to understand the phenomena, the properties and the laws of nature, and the relations between himself and nature. And through this activity in production, he also gradually comes to understand, in varying degrees, certain relations that exist between man and man. None of this knowledge can be acquired apart from activity in production. In a classless society, every person, as a member of society, joins in common effort with the other members, enters into a definite relations of production with them, and engages in production to meet man's material needs. In all class societies, the members of the different social classes also enter, in different ways, into definite relations of production and engage in production to meet their material needs. This is the primary source from which human knowledge develops. Man's social practice is not confined to activity and production, but takes many other forms. Political life, scientific and artistic pursuits. In short, as a social being, man participates in all spheres of the practical life of society. Thus, man, in varying degrees, comes to know the different relations between man and man, not only through his material life, but also through his political and cultural life, both of which are intimately bound up with material life. Of these other types of social practice, class struggle in particular, in all its various forms, exerts a profound influence on the development of man's knowledge. In class society, everyone lives as a member of a particular class, and every kind of thinking, without exception, is stamped with the brand of a class.
Oh, the shark's teeth, you can see them, always ready to attack, but you won't see Mackey's knife blade till you feel it in your back. On a sunny Sunday morning, there's a dead man on the street, while a live one turns the corner, Mac the knife still on his feet. Millionaires keep disappearing, Meyer Goldberg's gone away, Mac the knife spends Meyer's gold now, how he got it we can't say.
The police found Jenny Taylor with a knife blade in her gut. Mac the knife strolls by the harbor, says he never met that slut.
What about that fire in Soho?
7 kids died in the smoke.
Mac the knife stands in the crowd and laughs now. No one asks him, what's the joke?
And that well-known teenage widow, whose name the paper won't reveal, she woke up and someone raped her.
Mackie, how'd that make you feel?
She woke up and someone raped her. Mackie, how'd that make you feel?
Principle 5 of Unitarianism states the right of conscience and the use of democratic process within our congregations and society at large. When Brecht finally returned to Germany from exile in 1946, he found that then occupied Germany had reinvigorated capitalism with a fresh coat of paint. Some of the old rulers had come back under a new flag. He wrote a poem about it called The Anachronistic Procession, or Freedom and Democracy. Spring returned to Germany. In the ruins you could see early green birch buds unfold, graceful, tentative, and bold. As from many a southern valley, voters left their houses to rally, forming a disjointed column underneath two banners solemn, whose supports were all worm-eaten, their inscription weather-beaten, though its gist appeared to be freedom and democracy. Every church bell started ringing, soldiers, widows, airmen's women, orphaned, shell-shocked, crippled, raped. Open-mouthed, the watchers gaped, and the deaf could tell the blind who it was that marched behind. Such a slogan as may be freedom and democracy. At the head of Featherbrain sang with all his might and main, Allons, enfants, God save the king, and the dollar, ka-ching, ka-ching. Next, with monstrance held up high, two in monkish garb strode by. As for what they wore below, did I glimpse a jackboot's toe? On their flag, the cross looked thicker than the previous swastika. Now the latter was outdated, it had been obliterated. Under this there marched a father, sent from Rome, where, so we gather, he had left his holiness, gazing east in deep distress. Next, to celebrate the night of the long knives, comes a tight knot of men who loudly call for another free-for-all. Then the faceless trust directors, those men's patrons and protectors, pray for our arms industry, freedom, and democracy. Like a cock worn out with rutting, a pan-German passes, strutting. He wants freedom of the word being murder. Keeping step, next march the teachers, toadying, brain-corrupting creatures, for the right to educate, boys to butchery and hate. Then the medical advisors, Hitler's slaves, mankind's despisers, asking, might they now select a few reds to vivisect? Three grim dons whose reputation rests on mass extermination stake their claim for chemistry, freedom, and democracy. Next, our whitewashed Nazi friends on whom the new state depends, body lice whose pet preserve is in the higher civil service. After them, behold the former editors of Streicher's Stürmer, all set to protest unless we get freedom of the press. Next in line, honest taxpayers, once renowned as Semite slayers, gagged today, want guarantees for the new minorities. As for those parliamentarians who in Hitler's day were Aryans and now pose as barristers, freedom for such gifts as theirs. While the black market man asked why he came out on the march, unconditionally replies, to preserve free enterprise. And the judge, now this is rich, wields outmoded laws by which, Hitlerized up to the hilt, he finds men like himself not guilty. Poets, painters, and musicians seeking grub in good positions, noble souls who now assure us they were no friends of the Führers. Through the streets resounds the lash, SS men flogging for cash. Freedom needs them too, you see, freedom and democracy. And those Nazi women there with their skirts up in the air, legs they reckon are what gets, Allied sweets and cigarettes. Strength through joy dames, spies, Jew baiters, Gestapo investigators, tax gifts interest stimulators, irredentist liberators. Blood and dirt elective allies winding over hills and valleys, belched, stank, squittered out their plea, freedom and democracy. Till all stinking fit to burst, they arrived in Munich first, city of the Nazi movement, home of German self-entombment. Misinformed in misery, see its baffled bourgeoisie, standing where their houses stood, lacking certainties and food. As the smelly column staggers through the rubble with its banners, by the brown house there's a surge, and 6 silent shades emerge. All now halt to mark this meeting, and the 6, heads bared in greeting, join the column which once more bears its banners on before. In 6 cars, those 6 assorted party members are transported, while the crowd shouts, "Now we'll see freedom and democracy." Bony hand grasping a whip, first oppression takes a trip, in a half-tract furnished free by our heavy industry. In a rusty tank much greeted, next comes plague, his breath is fetid. To conceal his flaking skin, he wraps a brown scarf around his chin. After him see fraud appear, brandishing a jug of beer. You will get your glasses filled when you have let him take your children. Older than the hills and yet still out for what she can get, stupidity staggers on board. Riveted, she stares at fraud. Lolling back as at a play, murder too is on his way, perfectly at ease as he hums Sweet Dream of Liberty. Shaken by the latest crisis, robbery materializes in field marshal's uniform with the globe beneath his arm. Each of these 6 grisly figures, firmly based with ready triggers, said that there has got to be freedom and democracy. Lurching, a huge hearse comes last, once those 6 monsters have passed, inside which, unseen and wretched, who can tell what race lies stretched? Cold winds blow a requiem from the ruins over them, former tenants of the flats that once stood there, then great rats leave the rubble in their masses, join the column as it passes, squeaking freedom as they flee, freedom and democracy. The 6th principle of Unitarianism upholds as a goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. I came across this piece from Jacobin magazine, which I found apropos to this principle. It's entitled, "Let Them Eat Privilege." We are the 99%. It was like a gift from on high. For decades, the left had been trying to come up with a slogan that was both inclusive and oppositional. A slogan that put a relatively complex critique of class society in the populist language of American egalitarianism. Something that spoke to a widespread sentiment that the elites had gotten too wealthy and powerful and had to be reined in. But a recent Vox article citing TED talker and New York Times columnist Anand Giridharadas casts doubt on just who gets to sit at that 99% table. It seems 1%er privilege is haunting quite a few of us. Don't console yourself that you are the 99%, he says. If you live near a Whole Foods, if no one in your family serves in the military, if you're paid by the year, not the hour, if most people you know finished college, if no one you know uses meth, if you married once and remain married, if you're not one of 65 million Americans with a criminal record, if any or all of these things describe you, then accept the possibility that actually you may not know what's going on and you may be part of the problem. Before you go after the 1%, Giridharadas says, take a look at yourself. Kill the 1%er within. Check your privilege. But instead of explaining what it actually means to me among this tiny sliver in terms of concrete earnings, a accumulated wealth or class position, Vox and Giridharadas rely on strange descriptors that Vox considers privileges. By forcing the middle class to divert their attention downward and within, instead of at the real power players above, Vox and Giridharadas are playing into the right's hands. It's an attempt to shame the middle class, those with some wealth, but relative to the top 1 or 1/10 of 1%, mere crumbs, to make them shut up about the rich and super rich, and instead look at those below as a reminder that it could all be much worse. Let's take a closer look at Giridharadas' list of supposedly 99% traits and find out just how representative they are of the bulk of the US population. Only 5% of adults have ever used meth. A quick perusal of Whole Foods' website shows a location in every major metropolitan area in the United States, and as of 2010, 80.7% of Americans live in urban areas. More than a third of Americans hold a college degree, and although 57% of those under 50 have an immediate family member who's served in the military, only a third of those under 30 do. That's a far cry from 99%. But the 1% concept isn't about a lifestyle or individual consumption habits. A graduate degree and a kale smoothie do not a 1%er make. It's based on concrete socioeconomic relations, first brought to popular attention in an academic study by economists Emmanuel Saez and Thomas Piketty. A study that specifically charted the enrichment of this tiny minority amid the economic stagnation and impoverishment of nearly everyone else. The 1% isn't some amorphous boogeyman inside all of us, as Vox seems to believe. It's a very real class. And we don't need a list of cultural symptoms of 1% lifestyle privilege to figure out who they are. Just run the numbers. If your household, or to be generous, the one you grew up in, makes an adjusted gross income of at least $343,000, you are, in fact, the 1%. Even if you smoke meth, went to boot camp, and on your third marriage, yes, even if most of your friends didn't finish college and live kind of far from a Whole Foods. Now, if you or the household you grew up in make an adjusted gross income of less than $340,000, you are technically the 99%. Even if you've never seen combat, hang out with college-completing dorks, and are too chicken shit to smoke crystal. In other words, Giridharadas' checklist is bullshit. It reads like a wealthy New Yorker whose only concept of flyover America is an episode of Justified. But what then is 1%dom? Is it simply earning north of $340,000 a year, $10,000 less, and you're Tom Joad? $10,000 more, and you're the Monopoly man? No, it's about the class that it places you in. The category of class, after all, is relational, not gradational. Most of the super rich get their money by virtue of exploiting the labor of others and holding private property. Corporate shares, real investments, bonds, and treasury bills, etc., that they will fight tooth and nail to protect. Even when the income of the 1%, mostly the bottom half of that select group, is derived primarily from high salaries as opposed to returns on investment, it's far more likely to be reinvested in shares, bonds, and real estate, and of course, elite educations and other opportunities for their children, than the income of the middle 40%, who have hardly anything left once the bills are paid. That means that even with nothing more than a killer W-2, the salaried lower half of the 1% still have the means to consolidate themselves as an elite class, while the rest of us are immiserated. When a cut in capital gains taxes is paid for by hiking state tuition and slashing social services, the 1% benefits while the vast majority of the 99% loses. When a new law is passed making it harder to organize a union, or wages are squeezed to wring out higher and higher corporate profits, it's the 1% and their investment portfolios that benefits, and the majority of the 99% who loses. It's real winners and losers, not a state of mind and not a culture. What's bad for you economically is probably good for them. That's why the rest of us will have to come in conflict with this tiny elite and its institutions if we're going to win a more just and egalitarian future for ourselves. By substituting class relations for an arbitrary list of privileges, Vox is attempting to paint a picture of an immiserated America with no villain. It's an America without a ruling class that directly and materially benefits from everyone else's hard times. And this omission isn't just incorrect, it robs us of any meaningful oppositional politics that could change it all. It's a conclusion that, despite Vox's endorsement, plays into conservatives' hands. Like the journalist Robert Fitch once wrote, it is the aim of the right to restrict the scope of class conflict, to bring it down to as low a level as possible. The smaller and more local the political unit, the easier it is to run it oligarchically. In other words, divide and conquer. So why turn inward? Why argue over who's got the sweeter deal and how we're all responsible for the gross inequity of society when it's not that much more than a tiny sliver of millionaires and billionaires at Davos sipping wine and rubbing shoulders with politicians? Let's try worrying more about knowing thy enemy and building solidarity from that recognition. Check your privilege? Sure. But for once, let's try checking it against the average hedge fund manager instead of random Whole Foods shoppers.
You'll notice in your order of service that now Mark Fossen will sing the Ballad of the Easy Life. He double-booked himself this morning and is not joining us. He didn't explain why, but I think crystal meth has something to do with it. He is the 1%. This is Concerning the Infanticide, Marie Farrar, by Bertolt Brecht. The principle, Sven reminds me to remind you of, is respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are all a part. Thank you, Sven. Concerning the infanticide, Marie Farrar. Marie Farrar, born in April, no marks, a minor, rachitic, both parents dead, allegedly up to now without police record, committed infanticide, it is said. As follows. In her second month, she says, with the aid of a barmaid, she did her best to get rid of her child with 2 douches, allegedly painful but without success. But you, I beg you, with your wrath and scorn, for man needs help from every creature born. She then paid out, she says, what was agreed and continued to lace herself up tight. She also drank liquor with pepper mixed in it, which purged her, but did not cure her plight. Her body distressed her as she washed the dishes. It was swollen now quite visibly. She herself says, for she was still a child, she prayed to Mary most earnestly. But you, I beg you, check your wrath and scorn, for man needs help from every creature born. Her prayers, it seemed, helped her not at all. She longed for help. Her trouble made her falter and faint at early mass. Often drops of sweat broke out in anguish as she knelt at the altar. Yet until her time had come upon her, she still kept secret her condition, for no one believed such a thing had happened, that she, so unenticing, had yielded to temptation. But you, I beg you, check your wrath and scorn, for man needs help from every creature born. And on that day, she says, when it was dawn, as she washed the stairs, it seemed a nail was driven into her belly. She was wrung with pain. But still she secretly endured her travail. All day long, while hanging out the laundry, she racked her brains till she got it through her head. She had to bear the child, and her heart was heavy. It was very late when she went up to bed. But you, I beg you, check your wrath and scorn, for man needs help from every creature born. She was sent for again as soon as she lay down. Snow had fallen, and she had to go downstairs. It went on till 11. It was a long day. Only at night did she have time to bear. And so, she says, she gave birth to a son. The son she bore was just like all the others. She was unlike the others, but for this there is no reason to despise this mother. You too, I beg you, check your wrath and scorn, for man needs help from every creature born. Accordingly, I will go on with the story of what happened to the son that came to be. She says she will hide nothing that befell. So let it be a judgment upon both you and me. She says she had scarcely gone to bed when she was overcome with sickness and she was alone, not knowing what would happen, yet she still contrived to stifle all her moans. And you, I beg you, check your wrath and scorn, for man needs help from every creature born. With her last strength, she says, because her room had now grown icy cold, she then dragged herself to the latrine and there gave birth as best she could, not knowing when, but toward morning. She says she was already quite distracted and could barely hold the child, for snow came into the latrine and her fingers were half numb with cold. You too, I beg you, check your wrath and scorn, for man needs help from every creature born. Between the latrine and her room, she says, not earlier, the child began to cry until it drove her mad, so that she says she did not cease to beat it with her fists blindly for some time till it was still. And then she took the body to her bed and kept it with her there all through the night. When morning came, she hid it in the shed. But you, I beg you, check your wrath and scorn, for man needs help from every creature born. Marie Farrar, born in April, an unmarried mother, convicted, died in the Meissen penitentiary. She brings home to you all men's sin. You who bear pleasantly between clean sheets and give the name blessed to your womb's weight must not damn the weakness of the outcast, for her sin was black, but her pain was great. Therefore, I beg you, check your wrath and scorn, for man needs help from every creature born.
So when Tom Goldsmith approached me and said, you should do a Brechtian thing, I wasn't really 100% sure what that meant. This is the result of that. I want to thank all my collaborators in this. Alexis Bake, Danny Bates, Lara Haynes, Joanna Strawn, Denoris, who couldn't be here today, and the many others who've given input to this project. I especially want to thank David Owens, who's been wonderful to work with and who has handled any piece and concept of music that we've thrown at him. And I would be very amiss if I didn't single out Brandon Larson, our tuba player, Curtis Livingston on the trumpet, Hans Heath on the French horn, and he was also the arranger of Gluttony from the Seven Deadly Sins of the Bourgeoisie, the song you heard in the very beginning of the service. And Eric Wieben, who plays the trumpet and arranged the Internationale fabulously. A couple of quick announcements. The Jacobin magazine, the article from which I read, has a reading group that's meeting at People's Coffee, May 5th at 6:30 p.m. And I think that's a monthly meeting. And also, on May 11th, we're going to start what we call a Sociable Socialists Revival. You may see a flyer in your order of service that will meet here at the church monthly to get together, be sociable, and talk about all things socialist. So join us for that. And then finally, when you walk out the door, you will probably be ambushed by some small children who will try to sell you some trees. It's for a good cause. Get your money out and buy some trees. They're going to go to Uganda and be planted. Okay? Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. And we're going to... We're going to have a brass quartet play us out on the Internationale.